If only you had died at birth, my life would have been perfect." Those weren't the words of a cruel stranger. They came from my own mother's mouth. On my 12th birthday. The candles were still flickering. The cake was still untouched. And she stared at me like I was the worst mistake she'd ever made. Most kids grow up with lullabies. I grew up with insults. While other mothers shared baby albums, mine shared how I ruined her figure. But I never imagined the hatred went deeper than words until I found the file. The truth inside that envelope made me question whether I should have survived at all. If stories of truth trauma and healing speak to you, please like this video, leave your thoughts below, and subscribe for more powerful journeys like Brooke's. Brooke always knew she wasn't the golden child, but she didn't expect to be treated like she should have never existed. Raised in a quiet Oregon suburb, Brooke lived with a mother who wore resentment like perfume, overpowering, inescapable. As a little girl, Brooke thought if she just behaved better, smiled more, shrank herself small enough, her mother might finally love her. But that moment never came. Her mother never missed a chance to remind her of the pregnancy weight that never went away, or how Brooke tied her down from chasing dreams. Even in front of others, the jabs kept coming masked as sarcasm, but always carrying venom. Brooke's father, absent. Her aunt and uncle clueless. School was her only escape. But even there, she walked like a shadow, too afraid to exist too loudly. Yet deep inside, something was stirring. A need to understand. A need to survive. And most of all, a need for truth. Because when you're told your birth was a mistake, you start to wonder what else they've hidden. And one day, Brooke found out. She wasn't supposed to make it out of infancy. And her mother had tried to make sure of that. Brooke's earliest memories weren't filled with bedtime stories or warm hugs. They were colored by silence, coldness, and shame. While other toddlers toddled toward open arms, she learned quickly that love was a luxury she didn't qualify for. At 4, she spilled orange juice on the kitchen tile. Her mother Diane looked down at her with fire in her eyes and hissed, "Can't you do anything right? You ruin everything." At 7, she asked for a hug after falling off her bike. Diane handed her a paper towel and muttered, "Stop crying. You're embarrassing." And on her 10th birthday, instead of gifts, she received a sigh and a reminder. "You know I had abs before you were born." Diane wasn't overtly violent. She didn't leave bruises on the skin. But her words sliced deeper than any belt ever could. Brooke was fed, clothed, and housed. On paper, she was fine. But behind closed doors, she was an emotional orphan, ignored, unwanted, unloved. School became her sanctuary. Her teachers adored her. She was quiet, respectful, always early. But inside, she was starving for approval, for kindness, for a reason to feel like she mattered. Still, Brooke clung to hope like a child clutching a broken toy. Maybe if she made the honor roll, Diane would notice. Maybe if she won the spelling bee, Diane would smile. But no matter how hard Brooke tried, the response was always the same. "You think you're better than me now? Don't act so proud, it's just middle school. Of course you did well. You didn't inherit your father's laziness, thank God." Even compliments were laced with poison. Brooke didn't understand why her mother resented her so deeply. She was just a kid. She didn't ask to be born. She didn't ask to steal anyone's figure youth or freedom. And yet somehow she paid for it daily. By high school, Brooke stopped trying. Not academically, she was still a straight-A student, but emotionally, she stopped hoping her mother would ever change. She learned to keep her distance, make herself small, and channel her pain into achievements. She got a part-time job at 16, not because they needed the money, but because being out of the house felt like freedom. She worked late shifts at a bookstore, relishing the quiet and the smell of old pages. She'd lie and say she had study groups on weekends just to escape for a few hours. But even then, Diane found ways to tighten the leash. If you're out of the house so much, maybe you don't want to live here anymore. You better not be sleeping around like your cousin. Why are you always avoiding me? Are you ashamed of your own mother? Shame? Brooke carried it like a second skin, but not because of Diane. Because deep down, she started to believe Diane was right. Maybe she was a burden. Maybe she did ruin things. Maybe she shouldn't have been born. The real breaking point came during Brooke's senior year. She was applying for college scholarships and needed her birth certificate and some medical forms. Diane was reluctant, snapping, "Why do they need that crap?" But Brooke insisted. After hours of digging through boxes in the garage, Brooke stumbled upon an old faded folder, tucked between photo albums. It wasn't labeled. Something about it made her pause. And when she opened it, the world cracked. Inside were pages from a psychiatric evaluation, dated just months after Brooke was born. Words like postpartum psychosis, infant aggression, and risk to child danced across the page. There was a note from a doctor. Patient admits to intrusive thoughts and repeated fantasies of harming the infant. Recommends immediate intervention. Brooke's heart slammed in her chest. She read it again and again. There was no mistaking it. Her mother had told a professional clearly in writing that she wanted to hurt her baby. Hurt her. And no one had ever told Brooke. No one had warned her. Suddenly, everything made sense. The neglect, the cruelty, the unspoken hate. Brooke wasn't imagining it. Her mother never wanted her. Worse, she had once wanted her dead. Brooke sat in that garage, numb, clutching the folder like it might vanish. The truth she had buried in her heart for years had finally clawed its way to the surface, and it was worse than she ever imagined. But instead of breaking down something inside, Brooke crystallized. This wasn't just pain anymore. It was proof. And with proof came power. Brooke didn't sleep that night. The folder haunted her like a ghost, perched on her chest. Every time she closed her eyes, her mother's voice echoed, "If only you had died at birth." But now Brooke understood it wasn't just a cruel insult. It was a confession. For a week she said nothing. She couldn't. The weight of that truth was paralyzing. She went to school, smiled at her classmates, aced her tests, and then went home to the woman who once fantasized about her death. But something had shifted. Brooke no longer saw Diane as powerful. She saw her as exposed, small. And suddenly, Brooke wasn't afraid anymore. The breakthrough came 2 weeks later during Thanksgiving weekend. Every year, Diane insisted on hosting a massive family dinner, not out of love, but out of pride. It was the one day a year she could play perfect mother to her sister's cousins and elderly parents-be, people who thought Brooke was just the shy one, and Diane was just a little strict. But this year, Brooke had a plan. As relatives bustled in with pies and coats, Diane was in full performance mode, offering wine, laughing too loud, asking about everyone else's children. Brooke, meanwhile, moved like a ghost through the house, waiting for the right moment. After dinner, everyone gathered in the living room for coffee and desserts. The room buzzed with small talk and shallow compliments. That's when Brooke stood up, holding a manila envelope in her hand. I found something she said loud enough to quiet the room. Her mother froze. "Brooke, not now." But Brooke looked her in the eyes. Calm, steady, unshaken, "No, Mom. Now." She turned to the room. "I found these papers in the garage. They're from when I was a baby." Brooke began to read aloud. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She simply read line by line the psychiatric evaluation, describing Diane's postpartum psychosis, the intrusive thoughts, the violent fantasies, the clinical recommendation that Diane be monitored and separated from the child if symptoms worsened. The room went dead silent. A fork clinked against a plate. An aunt gasped audibly. Diane stood up, red-faced. "You're twisting this." Brooke cut her off. "I didn't write it. A doctor did. You signed it. You have no idea what I went through." Brooke turned to her. "No. You have no idea what I went through. Growing up in the care of someone who hated me for existing, who told me I ruined your body, who mocked me for being born." A cousin murmured, "Wait, you said that to her?" Diane's eyes darted around the room. "I had postpartum depression. I was sick. That was years ago. But Brooke didn't flinch. And you never got help. You buried it. And you buried me, right along with it." Someone from the back, a second cousin, maybe spoke up. "Is that why you never let her come to the lake house with the rest of us?" Brooke nodded slowly. "She always said I was too sensitive for family events, but I think she just didn't want witnesses. The spell was broken. Suddenly, years of whispered observations, weird comments, and inconsistencies began making sense to the relatives. One uncle asked, was this the reason she used to lock herself in her room all day? Diane, now panicking, snapped, "This is a smear campaign. You're all just falling for her manipulations," but the room had turned. All eyes were on Brooke, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't the silent girl in the corner. She was the voice of truth. The manila folder sat on the coffee table like a loaded gun. Brooke didn't need to yell. The documents spoke for themselves, and the reactions from disbelief to horror confirmed what she'd always suspected. They never knew, but now they couldn't unknow it. She walked out of the room without another word, leaving Diane in the wreckage of her carefully curated facade. That night, Brooke slept better than she had in years. But the story didn't end there. 3 days later, Brooke uploaded a video to TikTok. Not dancing, not lip-syncing. Just her sitting in her room, holding the same manila folder. "I'm Brooke," she said, "and I want to talk about the kind of abuse people don't see. The kind that hides behind birthday cakes, school photos, and polite smiles. I want to talk about what it means to be raised by a mother who wished you hadn't survived." The video went viral. Within 24 hours, she had over 300,000 views. Within a week, 2 million. Her comments section flooded with women and men sharing similar stories. I thought I was alone. My mom used to say the same things. "Thank you for saying what I never could." One comment read, "I'm a nurse. What you read in that file isn't just heartbreaking. It's criminal." The story hit Reddit, then Twitter, then the local news. Meanwhile, Diane's Facebook filled with furious messages. Former friends distanced themselves. A distant cousin posted, "I can't believe I defended that woman." But Brooke, she was no longer just a daughter. She was a survivor, a voice, a catalyst. She started a YouTube channel to talk about emotional abuse, mental health stigma, and what it means to grow up in a house where you're unwanted. Every post brought more people, more stories. She wasn't alone anymore, and neither were they. But the most unexpected twist came weeks later when Brooke received a message from her grandmother. Not a text. A handwritten letter. In it, her grandmother apologized. She said she never knew the depth of Diane's illness, that if she had, she would have stepped in. She closed the letter with, "You deserved better. You still do. And I see you now." Brooke cried for hours after reading it, not because it healed everything, but because for the first time someone from the family chose her, chose truth. For a while, Brooke thought going public would be the hardest part. But she was wrong. The internet didn't stay quiet, and neither did her mother. What followed wasn't silence, it was retaliation. Diane created her own Facebook post, dripping with denial and self-pity. "My daughter is telling lies for attention. I suffered from temporary depression, like many new mothers. I loved her always. She's manipulating you all for views." Brooke scrolled through the comments, half from strangers calling Diane out, half from old church ladies and high school friends defending her. No way she would do that. People will say anything online. Brooke should be ashamed of airing private family matters. Then came the voicemails. "You want attention. You got it. Hope your little followers are worth tearing your own family apart." One ended with, "If your dad were alive, he'd be disgusted." That one cut deepest, because her father, the absent figure Diane always badmouthed, had died in a car crash when Brooke was 5. She barely remembered him, just a tall man with kind eyes, who used to call her his little bird. He was the only one who ever tried to shield her from Diane's moods. After he died, Diane changed. Or maybe she stopped pretending. Brooke deleted the voicemail and stared at the ceiling. Was she doing the right thing? Had she really exposed evil? Or had she just poured gasoline on a dying fire? Her chest tightened with doubt, then rage. This wasn't justice. It was war. And somehow, even when the truth was out, her mother was still playing the victim. Days later, the final crack came. Brooke received an email from the college counselor at her dream university. "We've been notified of a situation circulating online regarding a family dispute. Though it doesn't impact your admission, we recommend deactivating public accounts for the sake of your reputation and safety." She stared at the screen, her vision blurring. Her mother wasn't just attacking her character. She was sabotaging her future. Tears spilled over before she realized they had started. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone and dialed a number she never thought she'd use again. Her Aunt Melissa picked up. "Brooke, I need to talk to someone," she whispered, voice cracking. Someone who knew her back then. There was a pause. Then Melissa said softly, "Come over." Melissa's house smelled like cinnamon and old books. Warm. Lived in. Nothing like Diane's curated coldness. Over cups of tea, Brooke laid it all out: the folder, the family dinner, the online backlash, and finally, the message from the college counselor. "I feel like I'm screaming underwater," Brooke said, voice hoarse. "No matter what I do, she turns it around. I thought I had power, but she's still controlling everything." Melissa sighed deeply. "There's something you don't know." Brooke looked up. "What, I tried to intervene once. After your dad died, I begged her to get help. I told her you needed therapy attention, love. But she shut me out. Said I was overreacting. That I had no idea what motherhood was like." Brooke swallowed. "And you believed her. I didn't want to. But I didn't fight hard enough. I didn't protect you." A silence fell between them, heavy and bitter. Melissa finally added, "There's more. That evaluation, your grandmother helped cover it up. She paid to keep it from going into permanent state records. Your mom almost lost custody twice. But your grandmother said, 'Family comes first.'" Brooke sat frozen. Even the ones who weren't actively cruel had failed her through silence, through convenience. That's why she wrote me that apology letter, Brooke realized aloud. Guilt. Melissa nodded slowly. Brooke stood and walked to the window, her chest heaving. All these years she had carried the weight alone. Now she realized they all knew something. Maybe not everything, but something. And no one saved her. She clenched her fists. Her breath came sharp and shallow. This wasn't just about her mother anymore. This was about the entire system that allowed Diane to keep smiling at church, hosting Thanksgiving, and dressing up as Supermom while her daughter drowned. Brooke turned back. "I'm done hiding. I'm not backing down. She gets to lie, manipulate, ruin reputations, and I'm supposed to stay quiet so I don't look dramatic." "No," Melissa said gently. "You don't have to stay quiet anymore." The next morning, Brooke released a new video. Not emotional, not shaky. Focused, measured, unforgiving. She named names. She told the full story. She explained how her mother nearly lost custody, how multiple adults knew and stayed silent, how abuse doesn't always look like bruises. It can look like perfection too. The video hit harder than the first. This time, journalists reached out. Advocacy organizations sent DMs. Mental health advocates reposted it with captions like, "This is what generational trauma looks like." And Diane, she went quiet. Not from shame, but from exposure. Because when abusers lose the ability to control the narrative, they retreat. But Brooke didn't retreat. She stood taller, and for the first time in her life, the fear was gone. Still in the privacy of night, another emotion crept in: grief. Not for the mother she had, but for the one she never had. A real mother. A safe mother. A mother who saw her not as a burden, but a blessing. And Brooke realized that mother never existed. She had been grieving someone imaginary all along. That grief turned into fuel. After the second video, Brooke took a break. Not because she was afraid, because she needed to. The storm had passed. Diane had gone radio silent, family members stopped calling, and the internet moved on mostly. But Brooke wasn't interested in likes or headlines anymore. She needed something deeper, something no viral clip could offer. She needed peace. So she did something she hadn't done in years. She packed a small bag, turned off her phone, and took a bus out of town. Destination: the coast. There was a small retreat center she'd read about months earlier. Nothing fancy, just a few cabins by the sea. They offered quiet yoga hot tea and long walks in the fog. Brooke didn't tell anyone where she was going. For the first time in her life, she was disappearing on her own terms. The first few days she slept, really slept. No nightmares, no scrolling, no defenses. Then came the long walks, along the wet cliffs, through the sea wind, past driftwood and broken shells. Each step gave her space to breathe again. But it was during one of those walks that she met June, a quiet, gray-haired woman who ran the center's bookshop. They first crossed paths near the garden where Brooke was reading alone. June offered her chamomile tea and simply sat nearby, not asking anything. It wasn't until their third or fourth chat that June said something that stuck. "You know, June," mused, eyes on the ocean, "there's a difference between surviving your childhood and outgrowing it." Brooke tilted her head. "What do you mean?" June smiled gently. "You survived. That's clear, but sometimes we keep fighting shadows, even after the war's over. Healing isn't about defeating your mother. It's about no longer needing to." Brooke stared at her, stunned by how simply the woman put it. Her entire life had felt like a battlefield. But what if she didn't have to fight anymore? That night, Brooke pulled out her journal. She wrote for hours. About the guilt, the fury, the love she never received, the child inside her who kept hoping, and finally about the woman she was now no longer begging for acceptance. By sunrise, she knew. She had to make one last choice, not for revenge, not for justice, but for herself. When Brooke returned home a week later, she felt lighter. She didn't reopen the comments. She didn't check Diane's page. She didn't even open the manila folder. Instead, she sat down at her desk and wrote one final letter, not to Diane, to herself. "Dear Brooke, you are not broken. You were born into chaos, but you did not become it. You deserved love. Every baby does. The fact that you didn't receive it isn't a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of her wound. And today you choose to stop carrying her pain. You are not her. You are free." She folded the letter and placed it in a box labeled Keep. Then she grabbed the old psychiatric folder and walked to the fireplace. For a moment, she hesitated. This file had defined her for months. No, years. It was the proof she was not crazy. The evidence of what she'd endured, but she no longer needed evidence. Her voice was enough now. She dropped the folder into the flames. The paper curled, blackened, and disappeared. Gone. The next day she reopened her YouTube channel, but not with a scandal. With a mission. "Hi, I'm Brooke. And if you've ever grown up feeling like you didn't belong even in your own home, I'm here to tell you, you're not alone, and you're not broken. Some of us were born into storms, but that doesn't mean we can't build our own sunshine." She smiled softly. "And from now on, that's what this channel is about. Not survival, not drama. Healing." In the first 24 hours, her inbox filled again, but this time with stories of growth, courage, rebuilding. Survivors like her. Some older, some younger, some still struggling. She replied to everyone. Because Brooke had made her choice. She wouldn't let her trauma define her anymore. She wouldn't let Diane be the final chapter in her story. She wouldn't fight shadows forever. She had outgrown them. Brooke's decision to transform her pain into purpose didn't just change her. It disrupted everything her mother had built on silence. In the weeks that followed her return from the coast, Brooke's YouTube channel gained momentum not for exposing, but for empowering. Survivors from all walks of life flooded her inbox. Therapists began referencing her story. She was invited to speak at a mental health panel hosted by a national nonprofit. But the ripple effect went beyond screens. Word spread back to Diane's social circle. The PTA group she once led voted her out quietly. A neighbor she had known for 20 years stopped waving. The pastor's wife, who had always praised Diane's strength as a single mother, posted a subtle quote about parents who punish children for existing. The final blow came when a journalist from a regional paper reached out not to Brooke, but to Diane. They were writing a piece on generational trauma and online advocacy. They asked Diane if she wanted to comment. She didn't. Instead, she vanished, deactivating all her social media, canceling holiday plans, and refusing contact with extended family. A cousin messaged Brooke days later. She won't even leave the house. First time I've ever seen her ashamed. Brooke didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Because justice didn't come through revenge. It came through truth. The lies had crumbled. The legacy of pain was no longer hidden. Diane's silence was not victory. It was defeat. Brooke, on the other hand, was just getting started. She partnered with a licensed therapist to co-host a podcast on emotional abuse in high-functioning families. She opened a scholarship fund for youth aging out of abusive homes. Her story wasn't just heard. It became hope for others. And the girl once treated like a mistake. She was now a voice the world couldn't ignore. Brooke no longer walked with her head down. She no longer questioned if she was too much or not enough. She had stopped chasing love from someone who never learned how to give it. Instead, she built her own definition of family, through the voices of strangers who became allies, through survivors who turned their scars into strength, and through the quiet parts of herself that once trembled, but now stood tall. The girl who once cried in locked bedrooms was now guiding others toward the light. And most importantly, Brooke finally understood. She was never born broken. She was born whole, into a broken system. And healing meant returning to herself, not begging for pieces from others. Her past didn't disappear, but it no longer defined her. Her voice, once silenced, had become her freedom, and in that freedom she bloomed. If Brooke's story moved you, share it. Subscribe for more real journeys of healing. And if you've lived a story like this, know you are seen and you are not alone.